It's 1968, and a French wire walker and street performer named Philippe Petit is performing on a street in France. An audience member hands him a piece of hard candy. He pops it in his mouth, bites down on it, and it crunches one of his teeth. This sends him to the dentist. And while he's in the lobby of the dentist's office waiting to see the doctor, he spots a magazine, picks it up, flips it open, and inside is a photograph of the World Trade Center, the Twin Towers, which are still under construction at this point. He decides on the spot that he will wire walk between the two towers a distance of 200 feet. He is 18 years old. Now at this point, the towers are the tallest buildings in the world, but before he can act on his dream, his father throws him out of the house because he's such a no-account loser. Dad does not believe that street performer is a real job, and Philippe doesn't have any income, and he has been kicked out of 5 different schools, and so he ends up out on the street with nothing to do, and he retreats to the local circus, which happens to have a wire walking apparatus, and there, after hours, he begins to work out on the wire, hours and hours and hours training to give life and to give 3 dimensions to the dream that he picked up from that simple magazine photo in the dentist's office. Philippe works and works and works until he's ready to try a wire walk of great distance and great height, but he falls into a lake. Nonetheless, he perseveres, and after years of training and planning, he moves to New York City. He finds a group of people who share this dream with him, and they help him scout the location of the 2 towers. They assemble the apparatus he needs to put the wire between them. They hide all the equipment at the top of the towers while they are still a construction zone, and they run a 450-foot cable over the 450-pound cable over the 200 feet by firing an arrow from one tower to the other that is trailing fishing line, which is trailing rope, which is trailing cable, which is trailing the actual cable, until they string this 450-pounder over. At one point, they lose the grip on the cable, and it begins to slide down toward the sidewalk, and they have to spend hours and hours and hours, hand over hand, pulling it back up so that it will stretch the distance. When he steps onto that cable on August the 7th, 1974, he is 24 years old. And for 45 minutes, he walks the cable, performing for the crowd that is on the street 1,400 feet below. Now, this event becomes known in New York City as the artistic crime of the century because it was really illegal. But Philippe calls it le coup, which I think puts it so much better. But whether you say it in English or French, you still get arrested, which he did, and the judge sentenced him to putting on a free performance in Central Park in exchange for having all of the charges dropped. Philippe reports that when he stepped out onto the cable at 1,400 feet and took those first few halting steps, everything faded away except the cable and himself. There's an ancient man named Abraham who was asked by God to step out onto a sort of cable we'd probably call faith today. This month we've been talking about his life. Our series of talks has been given the title, The Journey of Faith. We should probably today call it The Wire Walk of Faith. And we've been tracking his life to try to sort out what is a life of faith, how do you get one, and how can you live one so that it makes some kind of difference in the world. We're stretching back through history to the 2nd millennia BC. This man is a patriarch who lives in what today we would call the country of Iraq. He's married to a woman named Sarai. They're childless. And God shows up in his life and speaks to him out of the blue. It's a lightning strike. And he sends Abraham out of Iraq, and to a land that he's never been to before. And along with this word, which is go, leave, I want you to travel there to someplace you've never been, comes a promise from God, which is when he goes to this place, 2 things are going to happen. Number 1, he is going to find a permanent homeland. He's going to have a place to live. And for a nomad, that's a pretty good deal. That sounds pretty great. The other is that he's going to have children, descendants, that are going to be so numerous, they're going to be a blessing to the whole world. And at one point, God says to him that there are going to be so many, it will be like looking up into the night sky and seeing all the stars arrayed before you. Now, the panorama of his life is rolled out for us in the book of Genesis between chapters 11 and 25. And now what happens next is not a trial like the famine that sent Abraham's family to Egypt a few chapters back. This is a test. And the Hebrew root word here refers to something that is put under pressure so that its qualities can be revealed. The Lord tells him to take Isaac, who is the only hope that he's going to have any descendants, on a trip to a region called Moriah. This is in central Palestine, most likely pretty close to where modern-day Jerusalem would be. And this is what God says to him: take your son, your only son, whom you love, to a mountain in that region, and I will show you and use him as a burnt offering. Genesis blows by the implications of that and just says Abraham left early in the morning. Almost this sort of, let's get this over with, if this has got to happen. I don't know about you, but when something stressful is coming up for me, I don't want to wait all day for it, like some doctor's appointment or something. I want it to happen at 4 a.m. and get it over with and have it in my rearview mirror by the time the rest of the day arrives. And you almost get this sense. And so Abraham hits the road with his son, bringing 2 servants, 1 donkey, a bundle of firewood, and a knife. And they walk for 3 days. Probably the old man's riding because he is elderly at this point. And when they come to the foot of the mountains that God has designated, he gives Isaac the firewood, I'm guessing because the younger man has the strength to carry them, and they head up the mountain together. They have told the servants, you 2 stay here with the donkey, and the boy and I are going to go up the slope. We're going to worship for a while, and then we're going to come back down, which is sort of true. It's another one of Abraham's half-truths. As they walk up, thinking, man, 3 days is a long time to think about this. You know? He's walking along or riding along on the donkey, and for 3 days, if it's me, I'm wondering, how am I going to kill him? Do I kill him in his sleep and then put him on the altar? Do I have to kill him there? What do I tell Sarah when I go home? We've waited decades for this promise. Here he is. This is the person who's going to bring out the family tree that's going to be a blessing to all of the nations. And then I go home and report, honey, guess what? I killed our son today. How does he explain it to Isaac when he lays him on top of the wood? And how am I going to get the smell of my son's burning body out of my memory? That's a long time to think. They arrive at the designated place, and Abraham makes an altar out of rocks. That's just a pile of rocks. Takes the wood, arrays it around. He binds up his son and lays him on top of it. And Isaac asks, keen grasp of the obvious here, I see the fire in the wood, but where is the lamb for the sacrifice? And Abraham says this, the Lord will provide a lamb for the burnt offering. It's kind of true. It's another of his half-truths. He lays the boy there. He raises the knife. Verse 10 says, Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. Not just to kill him, but to slaughter him like a sacrificial animal. He feels the cold metal in his hand. And perhaps he has his other hand on the warm body of Isaac. Have you ever sent a post, an email, a text that you wished you could have back? I have. I've sent messages and I thought, 3 days later I'm thinking, oh, dang. I was just mad. I shouldn't have done that. I was thinking, reading this story, I thought, maybe this is, now this is terrible theology, but it might be good preaching. Maybe we should just, when I type a message and it's in an emotional moment or I'm under pressure, I feel very stressed, maybe before I hit the send button, I should just wait a minute, an hour, sometimes I sleep on it, till the next day, to give the angel of the Lord a chance to show up and stop me. And tell I've got this one. You don't have to send that. That's an aside. Here's what actually happens. Verse 11, but the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he gives the same answer. He says, here I am. He said, do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to it. For now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the name of the place, the Lord will provide. As it is said to this day, on the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. Now, this passage is a problem. New atheist Richard Dawkins says this: with the murdering knife in Abraham's hand, God shows up at the last minute and says, I was only joking. It's a combination of child abuse, bullying, and the Nuremberg defense. I was only following orders. This is an ethical nightmare, the entire scenario, and is constantly used as a way of confronting the biblical narrative with the question of how could a God who is good and who means well and who does all these wonderful things ask something like this. And so, I mean, to be honest, you have to ask the question, did Abraham get pumped here? Well, historically, you could say some scholars argue that child sacrifice is endemic to Semitic culture at this point. In other words, it happens all the time. And so God asking Abraham to do this and then stopping it at the last minute was his way of making God's position on sacrificing humans clear. In Jeremiah 32, you read on this same issue, God says it had never entered my mind that they should do this abomination. In other words, when Moses arrives centuries later and puts the Hebrew law into place and collected in what we call the Old Testament today, in those first 5 books, we have clear statements against child sacrifice. And so, in a way, this event, some scholars are arguing, prefigures that. And so it's a countercultural ethical statement about how if you're following God, you're going to take this ethical step forward because, sacrificing your kids, we're not doing that anymore. Now, symbolically, a lot of Christians say, and I think it makes sense in terms of symbolism, that this passage looks forward to Jesus being our substitute on the cross, provided by the Father, like the ram in the thicket, freeing us from death. Romans 8 says, God did not spare his own Son, but gave him up for us. On the mountain of the Lord, it will be provided. And in that way, Jesus, in the mountain where he's crucified, is provided for us. So when I read this story, it's what I see here is this. Abraham's not being pumped, he's being tested. A test is not a trial. It's not a circumstance that everybody in the world is enduring. A test is a situation that's set up to find out what the character of the thing being tested is. And I think what happens in this situation is being tested is a two-way street. Abraham's being tested, but in a sense, and I mean just in a sense here with an asterisk, God is being tested too. Now, Abraham knows that God is the God of life and death. And we get a picture of what's going on in his mind at this moment in Hebrews 11:19, where it says he considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. And so what's in Abraham's mind at this point is that the same Lord that makes this request is able to shield the family, his son, himself, from all the consequences of this, physical, psychological, because he has supernatural power in the event. It's not just a worldly event governed by the laws of space and time. And in the same way, God tests his own son, Jesus. In Gethsemane, Jesus finds out what's really going on. His inner qualities are revealed. If there's any way this cup can pass from me, and yet not my will, but yours be done. So when God tests Abraham, God is being tested as well. Not tested in the sense of being tempted or being put upon, but tested in the sense that God's inner character is revealed in the situation. So Abraham's faith is going to be tested and reported out, but the same is true of God's faithfulness. And here's why. Until there's a test, how do you really know? It's one thing for me to say, well, I read my Bible 4 times a week, I pray when I remember it, or maybe I do that 7 days a week, maybe I fast, maybe I tithe, maybe I would give my body to be burned, maybe I would do all of these things, and I have the right beliefs. I've checked all the right boxes in terms of doctrine and so forth, but when it comes to my own faithfulness to God, how do I really know until I'm tested? It's not that God needs to know that. He already knows all things, but it sure helps me to know it. I need to know what I'm made of. I need to know what I have to offer. I need to know where my limits are. I need to have what I would call spiritual self-respect because I've been in a test and I have passed. Abraham's able to walk away from this event knowing exactly who he is. Maybe for the first time. Because read the rest of the story. He's sure having trouble figuring out the rest of the time until this test comes. So when I'm in my cushy job back in the Midwest, and I have a dental plan, and I have my dream house on 500 acres, and I'm on cruise control to retirement, and I have a 401k, and I have traveling around and doing all these fun things. It's a great life, which I love that it was really kind to us. And God speaks to us about coming here to start 360 Church, and it's decision time. Or think of it this way. Would you serve God if it meant surrendering professional success? Not getting the big job, not getting tenure, not getting recognition, not getting another prize, not getting an award, not getting any more kudos, having it all pulled back and dying in obscurity. Gee, that's not why I went to Cal. Haven't you seen the brochure? It says I'm going to be famous. It says one person can change the world, and after you pay us the tuition, that person will be you, and you will rise up, and you will do this, and you will that, and you will achieve greatness. You almost can hear the Superman theme music playing in the background. And so this is what I'm thinking about when I'm reading this story. I'm thinking of all of the things that God could ask us to put on that same altar, which don't involve anybody's life or anybody's physical health, but involve the things that is closest to most of our hearts, which is achievement. Would I still walk with Jesus if he said, no more success, you're done? Because the plan I have for you requires a person that operates below the radar. The plan I have for you requires a person that isn't well known. The plan I have for you isn't the conventional, I'll become influential and do things in the world. It's actually the opposite. What I need you to be is a secret agent who operates in stealth mode, who is in the dark, who is off the grid, who has gone dark and operates in the background in a way that no one ever sees and never gets any recognition, but there is good you can do there that no one else can do because of who I've made you to be. The truth is, until we're tested, we're just talk. We had some apple pie with a bunch of our leaders last Wednesday night, talking about the church. Apple pie, ice cream, and fancy cookies. We put that up, they'll show up anytime. Carbohydrates, dessert. So we're eating dessert and stuff, and I like to draw things out on this big white piece of paper, which people refer to as a down-to-earth approach, because I think that really your learning style doesn't change much from the first grade. And if you draw things out and make pictures, people kind of get it. So I draw, which I just love doing.
And I remember at one point during the meeting, I forget what we were talking about exactly, I just laid myself on top of the thing. This is at my dining room table, on top of this big white sheet of paper. And I said, and it was a big drawing of 360 Church that we had made, all kinds of details. And some of you guys who here were actually on it. We named you. And we put my arms over the thing, and I just looked at the group and I said, this is my child. This is Janet's child. This congregation, this is our Isaac. Would I put that on the altar? I would. Because the purposes of God are greater than the plans of people. If I had to put that on the altar, I would raise the knife and I would turn around and look for the angel of the Lord. Hello? Hello up there! Hello up there! I've shown you my willingness. That's what everybody says. I just have to show you that I'm willing. See the knife? Ooh, sharp. Ooh, ooh, ooh. But how do you know until you're tested? And really, how do I know who God is until He absorbs His into the test? It's just talk. But we have a holy book. You can go to the bookstore and buy 10 different holy books. How do you know who God is until there's a test and you find out? Is God really my provider until I'm broke? Is He my healer until I'm sick? Is He my deliverer until I'm bound up? Do I know Him as the reconciler, the restorer? Is this a sweet way of putting smashed up stuff back together? He's like the best orthopedic surgeon in the world. He just puts things together and they become, that cliche, strong at the broken places, all that. But there's a lot of truth in that. Do I really know that God can do that God will do that until I've crashed? The test is what turns faith from talk to truth. I've seen God pour out money. I've been to the mailbox years ago, my car was about to be repossessed and found a check there for exactly the amount of money we needed to pay it off. We've been up against it over and over and over and over and over, and God has never failed us. He will always provide what we need to do His will. But until that test, that is just wishful thinking.